Hello, Suzanne Tyndall, news editor for ZDNet. You talk about not letting the legislation get through, and obviously the Greens will have a large part in that. What is Scott doing to talk to the other independent senators, and as in Senator Fielding, who's obviously going to be more for the filter than anything else, to get the message around so that we're not going to have a vote that puts legislation through?
Thanks very much for the question. Look, Senator Fielding is not going to be an ally in this. When I spoke in the beginning, I mentioned that what we're hearing, and this is from Scott to answer your question, and as you can imagine, Parliament's a weird place. You hang out with each other and people from all different parties speak to each other in different ways. So what we're hearing is that there are a number of Labor and Coalition MPs and senators who are not happy with what their upper echelons of their party are doing. Why I gave emphasis to that is because that's where our hope is to this legislation falling over. Because we're not going to just get the Coalition on side and then work on Xenophon and then work on Fielding. I can tell you that's not going to happen. Because the Coalition is not going to break ranks while Labor's out there presenting themselves as goody two-shoes protecting children and family values. That's why we've got to make it fall over for both parties, and it's why the issue of interacting with Fielding and Xenophon falls away. That's not where the tactics are in this case. And seriously, these days on anything, Mr Fielding is out there for a headline and looking for Liberal preferences to try and keep himself, retain his position as a senator. So that's the dynamic there. So that's why I would be urging that we're concentrating on both sides. So I certainly can assure you that Scott is doing a great deal in the federal parliament. When I gave out his leaflet recently, when I first arrived, and if you didn't get it, I got it. On that leaflet, he actually lists the site for the petition where you can sign. It's efa.org.au. So there's a petition there that you can sign online. Again, I'd encourage people to do that.
Also, recently we had a more drastic type of filter protest being some DDoS attacks, so distributed denial of service attacks by a group called Anonymous. What's your opinion on those sort of attacks to try and get a message across? So basically what was happening is people were sending a whole lot of information, so they were pinging the services for the servers of the government, and the government servers were getting... No, so that the websites would go down. Yeah, so Parliament House went down. Exactly, yeah.
Look, the Greens aren't out there encouraging people to go and crash websites, but there's a whole variety of tactics that are used in this campaign, and our success will come from a diversity of tactics. So we're not endorsing any of those tactics, but if you look at the history of political movements, it's the variety of tactics and building up the allies which is absolutely critical.
I just wanted to say, following from what Josh said before, for me, the really most important thing about this is the issue of freedom, of basic human rights, of the basic freedom of speech, which this outrageous net filter is set to take away from us incrementally. And I just think it's so great that there are people here today, but we need to have a much bigger movement about this. We need to have 100,000 people in the centre of Sydney protesting about this, because it is that big of an issue. And I just hope that everyone who comes here today makes a resolution to make this bigger next time. We need to have a massive protest, and it needs to be understood from the free speech position, because once a system has been set up where there's a filter and they can just add items to the blacklist, there are other blacklists that they can bring in. There's one from the UK called the IWF blacklist. They can just import that. And this blacklist was already responsible for shutting down Wikipedia in the UK last year. And they'll start adding new criteria to the blacklist, such as racial vilification. I'm totally against racial vilification. But as soon as they start adding new criteria to the blacklist, it'll be very easy for sites that just have someone on a forum saying something obnoxious cause that site to go down, because they're going to expand it. And this concept of a secret blacklist is totally against democracy. It's totally against a free society. And that's where Truth News Australia is focused on opposing it. We know that child pornography is a terrible problem, but we don't even think that this filter is really about child pornography. We think it is about a creeping authoritarianism and totalitarianism in our society, which we have to basically stop right now before it gets any further. Otherwise it will creep and creep to the point that we can't even have events like we have today, because that would be called hate speech. Thank you.
That says it beautifully. Just to add one thing that I think I've only just become aware of, and maybe not everybody is, that with these blacklists, which is what this internet censorship will rely on, some of them will be just bought from overseas countries. They just actually buy the list of what they've already deemed that they will ban. So, I mean, again, that's an extraordinary way to run your country in terms of freedom of speech. And every way you look at this, it's deeply wrong.
Just two follow-up questions. When will legislation be voted in Parliament? And also, I read the Senate estimates, and I'd like to thank Scott for his questions and helping out with the campaign.
So thanks for congratulating Scott. He's doing spreading the word across the country. In terms of when, we had been hearing that it would be coming in about a month's time, but my understanding is that a date hasn't been set. And again, what I always figure in political life, you're winning when the legislation isn't there and it isn't being debated. So by us getting more noisy, the government will be more hesitant about bringing it forward, and that's what we want to do. The government often handles these things, they don't want to be defeated on the floor of Parliament. So if we're making a lot of noise, a lot of those backbenchers are getting agitated and in their party room discussions they're saying this is madness, it will embarrass our government, it will embarrass Australia if we do it. We want that sort of agitation so the politicians are under pressure. And the ideal is that the legislation never comes before Parliament. So at the moment, hearing that it could be in a month, no date set, I'll check again with Scott and let Emma know what we hear. Thanks.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you also for coming out. It's fantastic to have all the support here. I just wanted to let everyone know that I have the EFA, Electronic Frontiers Australia petition here. We also have some copies if you'd like to pick up a cover sheet and a signature sheet if you wanted to take them back and get your friends, family, relatives, whoever you can find to sign them. We've got a couple here for you to take. If you just wanted to sign on this one, it'll be on the table when we're done here. Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to bring. So you brought it up before, so I thought I'd better mention that it's here. All right, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Any last questions? We done?
Actually, I have one. Thanks, Lee. You've covered a lot, actually. A gentleman who had to leave had an interesting question for me. He mentioned that he heard on a website recently, and he couldn't remember which one, that the Australian government is now looking to adopt the blacklist from England on top of the one we've got now, and I'm wondering what sort of political and legal implications there are for Australian internet users and what that means about... I was thinking a question of sovereignty, actually, and how the morals and mores and stuff of England might be imposed here accidentally. But I want to see what you think. Thanks. Or if that's even true, for that matter. Yeah.
As I mentioned before, certainly I'm understanding from my reading of how the legislation works, and it's just been talked about, is that that the government could be buying a blacklist from another country. I hadn't heard England mentioned. In terms of the question, is that legally possible? I actually don't know, but my guess is it probably is. Because let's remember, we're in an area of life that there's some aspects that there isn't rules and regulations about all those sorts of things, and we don't actually want them to be. We don't want these blacklists being sold between one country and another. What